Dostoevsky said straightforwardly, if there's no God, so if there's no higher value, let's say, if there's no transcendent value, then you can do whatever you want.
Can you? Anything you want. Go out and deck a random stranger. See how away with it you get. Actions have consequences. Let's do this. Greetings, fellow space travelers. BionicDance here. Today we're dealing with a fella called Jordan Peterson, a psychology professor. Oddly, the video doesn't say from where, and I had to look it up. The University of Toronto, apparently. He goes on for about 4 minutes about the book Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, but he never actually makes a point through the whole ramble. So we're going to skip the appetizer and go straight to the main course.
This is why I have such frustration, say, with people like Sam Harris, the sort of radical atheists, because they seem to think that once human beings abandon their grounding in the transcendent, that the plausible way forward is with a kind of purist rationality that automatically attributes to other people equivalent value. It's like, I just don't understand that. They believe that that's the rational pathway. What the hell is irrational about me getting exactly what I want from every one of you whenever I want it at every possible second? Why is that irrational?
Because it'll never fucking happen. Look, I got no love for Sam Harris. I think he's a bit of a wank, mostly because of his politics. But how is having no transcendent morality, which I don't think can possibly exists, but more on that later, the equivalent of getting whatever you want from everybody else? Don't you think people might just take exception to that and tell you to get stuffed? We all have to live together in this universe, which is going to require a certain amount of cooperation, but it doesn't require some sort of standards of behavior written into the fabric of the universe, much less a god to do the writing. Nor do we have any reason to suspect that such a thing might exist, no matter how much you might want it or believe it.
I mean, it's as if the psychopathic tendency is irrational. There's nothing irrational about it. It's pure naked self-interest. How is that irrational?
I'm not sure this guy knows what irrational means, which is a bit odd for a psychology professor. It describes the absence of reason, and you don't normally find an overabundance of logical thought in psychopaths. How is pure naked self-interest irrational? I suppose it isn't. If you only think in the short term and to Hades with the consequences. Once you factor in the possible repercussions of your behavior, it starts to look just a little bit less level-headed.
I don't understand that. Where's the pathway from rationality to an egalitarian virtue? Why the hell not every man for himself and the devil take the hindmost? It's a perfectly coherent philosophy.
It's people like this who scare me the most. People who do think it's rational and coherent to be selfish and uncompromising. Maybe they need a god standing over them ready to give them a paddling because they can't trust their own conscience to build the best possible world. I'm much more inclined to trust people who want to keep the world safe and productive for its own sake than those who, if their beliefs flagged for even a moment, might suddenly turn vicious.
So, I don't see, to me, I think that the universe that people like Dawkins and Harris inhabit is so intensely conditioned by mythological presuppositions that they take for granted the ethic that emerges out of that as if it's just a given, a rational given. And this, of course, precisely not Nietzsche's observation as well as Dostoevsky's. That's Nietzsche's observation. You don't get it. The ethic that you think is normative is a consequence of its nesting inside this tremendously lengthy history, much of which was expressed in mythological formulation. You wipe that out. You don't get to keep all the presuppositions and just assume that they're rationally axiomatic.
I don't know where he's getting this from. I don't recall Dawkins or Harris presupposing a damn thing about normative behavior or ethics. Or if they have, they kind of agree with Jordy here, that it comes from a long history of experience, finding the best way for the largest number of people to prosper. He gets what he doesn't get, he just doesn't get that he gets it.
To make a rational argument, you have to start with an initial proposition. Well, the proposition that underlies Western culture is that there's a transcendent morality. Now, you could say that's a transcendent morality instantiated in the figure of God. That's fine. You could even call that a personification of the morality. If you want to if you don't want to move into a metaphysical space, I'm not arguing for the existence of God.
Well, even if you were, it wouldn't make much difference. How can a transcendent morality exist? What is morality in the first place, if not an opinion on how people ought to behave? How can it be more than opinion? How can we know what it is? Which moral or ethical rules are the transcendent ones, and which are the ones people have made up? And how can this morality be enforced if not by people? After all, he says he's not arguing for the existence of a God, but if he's not, then what possible difference does a transcendent morality make? Not that it would really make any difference at all, since it would just be God's opinion on behavior, enforced with the carrot and stick of the promise of heaven or hell. What if this mystical morality ends up causing more harm than good? Should we ignore it? Make ourselves better in opposition to it? Don't people use the claim that this moral code exists as an excuse to mistreat others? When you really examine it, the existence of transcendent morality breaks down, becomes untrustworthy both in form and substance.
I'm arguing that the ethic that drives our culture is predicated on the idea of God, and that you can't just take that idea away and expect the thing to remain intact mid-air without any foundational support.
And again, this is what scares me about people who claim to believe in a God, in divine justice. I'd like to believe that if their theism went away, they'd have more sense than to start going around stealing, raping, and murdering, that they'd understand why sudden bouts of chaos and anarchy are unlikely to turn out in their favor. Am I being naive? Can we trust that? Or are they really that irrational and selfish? They claim to be better and more virtuous because of their relationship to a god, but it's portrayed here as if they're one wavering of faith away from becoming Hannibal Lecter, that they're just full of pent-up rage and selfish desire. And Jordy here doesn't say it, but there are plenty of God-botherers who insist that atheists follow God's moral code too. We just deny that that's the source of our morality. Of course, much like Pascal's wager, they don't seem to consider the part where each religion seems to have a different take on which morals matter and how to interpret them, or have a different set entirely. He claims that Western civilization is predicated on the idea of a transcendent moral code, but if that were true, let's see how comfortable he is if we don't have a justice system. Let's see how much trust he has in people to follow this code and in how it's enforced. Is he prepared to take that bet? Or do you suppose he might just be all talk here? Until next time, fellow space travelers, this is BionicDance saying don't run on automatic. Instead, please think.
You know, Dewey, we wouldn't have to do this if I had more Patreon patrons. Just saying.
Well, whoever that is, she's gotta get by us. Go get her, Sandra!
Schmoozer the Schmoozerian? Good evening. As a duly designated representative of the YouTube channel BionicDance, I order you to cease any and all trolling activity and return forthwith to your website of origin or to the nearest convenient internet site.
That ought to do it. Thanks very much, Sandra.
Do you believe in God? No? Then subscribe!
Sandra, when someone asks you if you believe in God, you say, wait, actually you got that right. Never mind.